today we're unpacking a song by Pash Up Worship, and the title is called There's Nothing That Our God Can't Do. Right? There is nothing that our God can't do. Thank you. I was waiting for the amen. Like, come on, like this is church. It's okay to have faith in church, right? There's nothing that God can't do. Now, here's the line from the song. It says, oh, just one word. You calm the storm that surrounds me. Now, you guys know I don't have to add my disclaimer every time that I can't sing. But it's so hard because as I was preparing this week, I listened to this song, I prayed through this song, I worshiped through this song. And so now it's so hard just to read the words on a screen without kind of singing the melody or the tune of it. So just kind of bear with me. But oh, just one word. You calm the storm that surrounds me. Just one word. The darkness has to retreat. Next line. Oh, just one touch. I feel the presence of heaven. Just one touch. My eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. And then it's your part, the title of the song. There's nothing that our God can't do. All right, let's practice that together, all right? On the count of 3, everyone's going to say, even those watching online, there's nothing that our God can't do. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. There's nothing that our God can do. Awesome. It's going to sound powerful because this is what it's going to sound like when the band plays it. A lot better, though. Oh, just one touch. I feel the presence of heaven. Just one touch. My eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can't do. Woo! Man, I just want to invite the band up right now. Just worship team, get on up here. No, I'm just kidding. They're not ready. They went to the green room and they're eating burritos and donuts right now. So we'll call them in at the end of the service, and it's going to be powerful, this song. And when I see the lyrics of this song, when it talks about just one word or just one touch, I'm reminded of one of Jesus' miracles. And what's so fascinating about the miracle that we're going to look at today is that Jesus didn't even initiate this miracle, but it was a woman's faith that caused this miracle to take place. Some of you, if you have your Bibles or a Bible app on your smartphones, go to Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8 is where we're going to pick up the story. Luke chapter 8, verse 40. And this is how it begins. It says, now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. And guess where Jesus was returning from? 2 weeks ago, we talked about it. Jesus was returning from the other side of the lake, the region of the Gerasenes, where he just delivered a man who had a legion of demons. You guys remember that story? I'm telling you, when that event happened, it went viral, hashtag 2,000 pigs. And so these guys on the other side of the lake heard about the story that Jesus went to the region of Gerasenes and healed the crazy maniac who lived in the tombs and would cut himself. Jesus healed him, and now he's on the way back to the opposite side of the lake, and they heard of Jesus' power and miraculous works, and so the crowd was expecting him. Let me ask you a question. How many of you walked into church this morning expecting God to do something in your life? I mean, so many times, Sunday morning becomes routine. It becomes habit. We get ready for church. We show up in the parking lot. We check in. We find our seats. We watch the 5-minute countdown. We sing a few songs. We hear a message, and then we leave. But I'm telling you, every time you come to church, every time you worship in your car as you're driving to work or school, every time you pray, you should be expecting Jesus to show up in your life. You should be expecting God to do something, to speak a word to your life. And so the crowd heard what Jesus did on the other side of the lake, and so now they hear that Jesus is making his way back to their side, and so the crowd has gathered expecting him. So verse 41 says, then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet. You know why I think Jairus fell at Jesus' feet? Because he heard that the demonic man came yelling towards Jesus and fell at Jesus' feet, and how Jesus had healed him and delivered him from the demons. So he's thinking to himself, maybe that's what you do. Because I heard that story. This man went and fell at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus moved powerfully in his life. And so Jesus ends up on his side of the region, and he comes to him and he falls at the feet of Jesus, pleading or begging with him to come to his house. Why? Because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. And as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And so picture this scene. I'm a dad. I have 2 daughters. And if one of my daughters was deathly ill and I needed Jesus to show up and to heal her, I would be so desperate. And so this man appears before Jesus, falls at his feet in desperation, begs and pleads with Jesus, Jesus, will you just come to my house? My only daughter is sick, on the verge or the brink of death. She's dying. We know from Luke that Jesus must have agreed, because it says as Jesus was on his way. So Jesus agrees to go to Jairus' house. And as Jesus is on the way, this crowd that was expecting Jesus is just surrounding him. Picture this in your mind. Hundreds of people, a crowd of people gathered around Jesus, the miracle worker. They've heard of what he has done. They're trying to get a glimpse of him. They're trying to hear just one word from him. Maybe they're just trying to touch him, to be close to him. And so here's Jairus. And I'm sure he's screaming, get out of the way, move out of the way, because I'm sure the crowd is moving at a very slow pace as Jesus is trying to make his way through the crowd to get to Jairus' house. And Jairus, as a desperate father, is saying, move out of the way, get my daughter sick, clear the road, let us pass. And in the midst of that chaotic scene, verse 43 says, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. A woman who was suffering with an illness, and her illness was that she was subject to bleeding, just uncontrollable bleeding. And no one could heal her, which means that she went and tried to get healing from someplace or someone, and no one could heal her. Now, let me tell you what Leviticus chapter 15 says. That's the Old Testament law. Leviticus chapter 15, where it talks about the law, it says that a woman who was bleeding was considered ceremonially unclean. And if you were unclean, that meant you had to quarantine yourself out from everybody, out from hanging out with people until your bleeding stopped. And once your bleeding stopped, you had to wait a few days, and then they would deem you clean again, and then you were welcomed, in a sense, back into society and amongst people. But while you were unclean, you had to remain isolated. And if you happened to sit somewhere, that thing that you sat, that place where you sat, was also deemed unclean. And if someone was to sit where an unclean woman sat, they were considered unclean. So for 12 years, this woman was considered unclean. For 12 years, this woman was isolated. Not even her family would want to be around her or even touch her or hug her. I mean, we've been in quarantine and social distancing for about 5 months, and it's driving some of us crazy. Imagine being isolated in quarantine for 12 years. And not only did she know she was unclean, she probably felt unclean. Trying to figure out the logistics of wearing clean clothes or having clean linen for 12 years. This miracle account is told in several of the Gospels, and Mark gives us a little bit more detail than Luke. And so I'm just going to jump real quick to Mark chapter 5, as he gives us a little bit more details on how this woman really tried to help herself or to get help. So this is Mark chapter 5, verse 26. It says, she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. So in other words, during this 12-year ordeal, she went to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, spent money after money after money after money, and no one could help her. In fact, it says instead of getting better, she grew worse. I mean, let's be honest for a moment. How many of us would have given up after like a year of trying to get help? Right? You're dealing with an issue. You're suffering from an illness, and you go to a doctor and there's no help. So you say, well, let me get a second opinion. And so you go to the next doctor and still no results. So then you go maybe to a third doctor or a fourth doctor. For 12 years, this woman was desperate. For 12 years, she went to doctor after doctor after doctor, spent all the money and resources she had, and instead of getting better, she grew worse. I can only imagine her frustration. I can only imagine her discouragement. She's worn out, she's tired, and she's all alone. And so she devises a plan because she heard about this man named Jesus. And I'm sure she heard the story of how Jesus healed the crazy guy from the other side of the lake. And she believed. Verse 27 says, when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She heard that Jesus has just landed on her side of the lake. And she knows, living in that region, being quarantined or isolated for 12 years, she knows that everybody knows who she is. That's the woman who's unclean. That's the woman that the doctors can't help. That's the woman that's lived in isolation. So she can't just simply show up in the crowd in front of Jesus because the crowd would recognize her and call her out and probably turn against her. And so her plan was to sneak up behind Jesus and behind the crowd in a sense. I'm just guessing, but I'm sure she was wrapped up and covered so that no one would recognize her as the unclean woman. And she thinks to herself, if I just touch his clothes, I mean, I don't need Jesus to come to my house. I don't need Jesus to pray for me. I believe that he is the Messiah. I've heard the stories. And if I just touch his coat, or other Bible translations say, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I'll be healed. What faith this woman has. If I just get close enough, I don't even need Jesus to see me. If I just get close enough so that from behind I just touch his clothes, I know I will be healed. So she touches him. And immediately, or instantly, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Oh, just one touch. I feel the presence of heaven. Just one touch. I forgot the next line. Something about my eyes can see. Somebody help me. My eyes can see. My heart can't believe. Okay, save me, guys. There's nothing that our God can do. All right. That's twice. I forgot first service too, the same part. That second line's tricky. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. Now we're going to jump back to Luke chapter 8 to pick up the story. Luke chapter 8, it says, "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you. In other words, Jesus, how can you even ask that question? I mean, the crowd that was expecting you is surrounding you. We're trying to make it to Jairus' house. Everyone's bumping up against you. Everyone's trying to get a glimpse of you. Everybody's trying to at least touch you. How can you say, who touched me? Everybody's bumping into you. Everybody's touching you, Jesus. But Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. See, the touch that Jesus was talking about wasn't just a regular touch. He says, no, someone touched me who had faith enough that power left me. I'm not just talking about a regular touch. I'm talking about a faith touch. I'm talking about someone who came expecting that I was going to do something in their life. And so the woman who was in hiding for 12 years knew she could hide no longer. And so it says she came forward. Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. Why? Because she probably heard that crazy guy across the lake came running down to Jesus and fell at his feet, and Jesus healed him. She probably heard that the reason why that he's on his way to Jairus' house, because Jairus came and fell at his feet. So she's probably thinking, maybe that's just what you do. You just got to fall at the guy's feet. And so Jesus says, who touched me? And she steps forward and she falls at the feet of Jesus. And in the presence of all the people, for 12 years, she couldn't be in the presence of people. And so after 12 years, for the first time, it says, and in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly or immediately healed. I mean, picture the scene. This woman had been suffering for 12 years. Isolated and alone. Here's her opportunity. Jesus, who she's heard of, is in town. She devises a plan to sneak up behind him because she needs as much of a private healing as possible. So she touches him, is immediately healed, and Jesus says, who touched me? She knows she has to come forward and confess. She comes forward, falls at his feet, and for the first time, she's within the crowd. And she says, Jesus, here's what happened. Here's why I touched you. Nobody could help me. I went to doctor after doctor after doctor. I spent money after money after money, and instead of getting better, I grew worse. But Jesus, I knew that if I just touched you, if I just even touched your coat, I would be healed. And Jesus, I'm healed. I feel it in my body. For the first time after 12 years, I'm free. Then Jesus says to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Your faith, your trust in me, your belief in me, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. And I'm telling you, faith is a powerful thing when it's placed in the right person. Faith and determination, right? Faith and determination bring healing to any situation. It was a combination of this woman's incredible faith that if I just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. I trust and I believe in him so much as the Messiah, the Son of the living God, that if I simply sneak up behind him and touch him, I will be healed. And the determination, right, For 12 years, she never gave up hope. For 12 years, she went seeking for help. For 12 years, doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, she never gave up. And now she hears the name of Jesus and she thinks, here's my chance. Here's my opportunity. Here is where the healing is going to take place. And so she pushes through the crowd. This frail woman pushes through grown men, pushing through the crowd that's trying to also get a touch of Jesus. She pushes her way, determined to get close enough to touch him. Man, faith and determination bring healing to any and every situation. But don't forget how the story began. Because there's a desperate father who's trying to get Jesus to his house. Imagine his frustration. Jesus agrees to go to his house. They're headed slowly because of the crowd to his house. And all of a sudden, this woman interrupts the parade. And Jesus stops to ask, who touched me? And then she comes forward and has her explanation. Who knows how long she talked for, explaining, Jesus, here's why I touched you. This was my circumstance, blah, 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 blah. This dude's like, okay, lady, I'm glad you got your healing. Get out of the way. Jesus, my daughter needs you. It must have taken some time. Because then it says someone from Jairus' home came and told Jairus some bad news. And he basically says, don't bother the teacher anymore. It's no use. Your daughter is dead. Verse 50 says, hearing this, right? Hearing the news that Jairus, it's too late. Jesus didn't make it in time. Your daughter's dead. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid. I know the news you just heard. I know the report you just heard, but don't be afraid, just believe. In other words, just have faith. In fact, have the same kind of faith that this woman had in me. Just believe, just trust, just have faith. And if you have faith, that's why there's an and. Just believe, and if you believe, and she will be healed. But it's connected to having faith. It's connected to believing. It's connected to trusting in who Jesus is. And if you trust me, and if you believe me, and if you have faith, she will be healed. So when Jesus, finally arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except his inner core, right? Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Hopesters, listen up. Sometimes you have to exclude the naysayers in your life. There is going to be people in your life that you might be walking through something difficult, and they're just that naysaying whisper in your ear. Like, oh, there's no hope for you. You tried. That doctor couldn't do anything. Oh, the second opinion was just the same as the first opinion. There's no hope. You've been dealing with this for how long? How many years? He's never going to change. She's never going to change. There's no use. So Jesus shows up. And he excludes the naysayers. And he says, I'm taking Peter, John, and James, and mom and dad. You guys come in with me. And he left everybody else out. So they walk in to the home. It says, meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead, but asleep. I mean, imagine, Jesus shows up at the house, everybody's crying because the news is she's dead. Jesus gets there and says, all right, Peter, James, and John, and mom and dad, come with me. They enter the house. As he's about to close the door behind him, he still hears the wailing and the commotion, and he looks back and he says, stop fussing, stop wailing. She's not dead, she's just asleep. In other words, who else is going to believe with us? And it says they laughed at him. They laughed because they knew she was dead and not asleep. They laughed at him knowing that she was dead. And what Jesus said about her being asleep was ridiculous. Jesus, she's not asleep, she's dead. But he, Jesus, took her by the hand. Just one touch. I feel the presence of heaven. I don't know the next line. Just one touch. Something, 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 something. Oh, there you go. My eyes were open to see. My heart can't help but believe. There's nothing that our God can do. I can't hear you from home. There's nothing that our God can do. Right? So Jesus goes in. He touches her. He takes her by the hand and he said, my child, get up. My child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them, give her something to eat. Remember, she's 12 years old. So Jesus is like, get her some nuggets and some waffle fries. Give her some of the Lord's chicken. She's hungry. It says her parents were astonished. Her parents were amazed. And then Jesus gives them this weird command. He says her parents were astonished, but he, Jesus, ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. I mean, Jesus, that's going to be kind of hard because the moment our daughter walks out of this house, everybody's going to know she's alive again and that something happened and that you did something. But the point in this is because this was early on within Jesus' ministry. And he didn't want the focus to be on the miracle. He still needed the focus to be on his teaching and what he was ushering in as the Son of God. See, the point of a miracle is not the miracle. The miracle points to the person of Jesus and who he is and the power that he has. I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up and to get ready because we're about to sing this song. But let me show you the chorus. We've been leading up to the chorus of this song that says, there's nothing that our God can't do. And so here's the chorus of the song. It says, there's nothing that our God can't do. There's not a mountain that he can't move. Oh, praise the name that makes a way. There's nothing that our God can't do. Now, in a minute, the worship team is going to play this song. And you have a choice to make. You're either going to sing this song or you're going to sing and believe this song. Those are the only two choices in a minute. You're either just going to sing this song or you're going to sing and believe what this song is saying. That your faith is going to be encouraged. That God is going to show up bigger in your heart and in your life to give you the faith to believe that there is nothing that God can't do. Because faith and determination bring healing to any and every situation. Now, I don't know what your situation is here this morning. But if you're facing something, and you might have been facing it for a while, maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe like this woman, years. And you've gotten to the point where you've just kind of settled with it. Like, I guess there's no use. I guess nothing's going to change. I guess I'm just going to have to learn to live with it. And Jesus would say to you this morning, don't be afraid. Just believe. Just have faith. Just continue to trust in me.